Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Africa
Yeah.
for Dummies podcast. And in this episode, it's going to be a fireside chat. It's a fireside chat with me and Zenge. And today, Zenge has a very special topic. Why are there so many old African leaders? Are there actually many old African leaders?
Well, I would say so. I mean, among the top 10 leaders, more than 5 of them, in terms of the oldest leaders and also in terms of the longest serving leaders, they're African. We have this, and the irony is that the average leader in Africa is above 60 years old. The average African is, guess what, under 30. And I'm being generous here saying under 30. Most countries, the average age is around 18, 19, 20. Right? So there is, I'm not saying that youth and young people should be in power, but there will be a disconnect between a president that's much older, and in many cases, the old president has been in power for a long time. So,
Right.
some of these leaders have been in power for a good chunk of their lives, and at the same time, you are very old. So you don't really have a personal lived experience of what the average person in your country is going through. So I found it very curious. Very curious. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, you do have that's a really great question. I do think that at some point, there is a level of okay, the thing for me is, right, that I come from Zambia, right? So in Zambia, you've seen different presidents come in and out, different political parties come in and out. We now have HH who's what, I think 50? Right?
Just no.
So
HH is 68. HH is 68.
Oh, geez.
I think.
It looks great for 68, man. Looks great for 68.
Fact check that. He's in his late 60s.
Wow, really? That's impressive.
Although when he started campaigning, when Hichilema started campaigning in his first campaign in 2006, he was 44.
That's crazy. That's really crazy. Resilience, man. But yeah, I mean.
Oh, HH is 63.
I don't know.
63.
I think because. Yeah. I was going to say whoa, but what I was trying to say is that I think because in Zambia you do see political changes, you do see presidents go in and out. I don't think you really have that frustration that I see when I meet people from, say, Uganda, for example, right? Who've never known anything outside of Museveni, right? And also, when I talked to before the whole Mugabe situation happened, Zimbabweans were also expressing the same. Well, it depends on who you're talking to, right? But some Zimbabweans were also expressing the same thing because they had never experienced anything outside of that. So I can definitely see how frustrating that is because I try to picture myself in those shoes. But I would have to say that it's something that I empathize with, but I can't empathize with fully because I don't know what that's like at 100%. I don't know what that's like fully. Where it's you.
Yeah, I find
you can't
it very
say
strange.
anything, and yeah.
Yeah, I find it very strange. Just a rundown of the top 5 longest serving African leaders, still or recently in power. For all of these listed, still in power. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Basogo, president of Equatorial Guinea, and he has been president from 1979.
And that one's a sad one, right? Because the what's it called?
For 7 years.
That one is a really sad one because Equatorial Guinea is supposed to be an extremely wealthy. It's extremely on paper, right? It's supposed to be doing well, but in reality, no.
Yeah, there was actually a time when its GDP became it was Africa's highest GDP per capita because it's got its population is like I think around a million. It's less than a million or a million, and
Mhm.
they have enormous oil wealth. But there's also a lot of centralization of the currency of the money in groups of related or semi-related elite. His son is the vice president. His son used to be the minister of foreign affairs, and I used to say this literally. He lived in Paris. He took the foreign part literally, um, and he has been charged a number of times for proceeds of corruption in Paris. Uh, Living a very lavish life, really. In this country could easily be Qatar, easily. you know. Um,
Mhm.
and then we have Paul Biya, who's the president of Cameroon. He has been president since 1982, right? Since 1982.
Mhm.
So that's
I believe his political
4
slogan
years.
was "the best is yet to come."
Yeah, yeah, and he just got re-elected. Was it last year? Yeah, I think last year he got
Mhm.
re-elected.
Yep.
Um, yeah, he got re-elected last year, and Paul Biya is what 93, 93 years old.
Mhm.
You know, um, the average age in Cameroon is around 18 or 19. Denis Sassou Nguesso, president of the Republic of Congo, not the Democratic Republic of Congo, the smaller Congo, also known as Congo Brazzaville, first took power in 1979 and then returned in 1997. So he has at least been in the presidency for as long as I have been alive. Uh, and then yeah, think about it. Then there's
Mhm.
Yoweri Museveni, 1986, who just clocked how many years? 40 years, right? He just clocked 40 years
Mhm.
this in
I think
January.
so.
It was
I
a
need
big
to check again.
celebration. Um, Isaias Afwerki, president of Eritrea, who had been he's the first president of Eritrea. He was elected in 1993 after Eritrea split from Ethiopia. Since independence, no elections have been held. Only one parliamentary session happened. So here, there's no bluffing. There's not like it's not like Uganda where there's semi-competitive elections, but everyone kind of is resigned to the fact that the man with the big hat will win. In Republic of Congo, there's an election that Denis Sassou Nguesso I think won by over 80%. Just is it last week, 2 weeks ago? Yeah, Republic of Congo. Paul Biya, we already talked about that election. Teodoro Biangwem, I think there's an election a couple of years ago, a few years ago. Yeah, but I think those are like
Mhm.
7-year terms. I can double check. But I think at the center of this thing also um, is how do they stay in power for a long time? There's money. If
That
you
was
are
actually going to be
President
my next
Nathan,
question.
yeah, so how do you stay in power for a long time? There's numerous means. You can use changing term limits. You can extend or remove age limits, like Uganda in the 2000s and 2010s. Yeah, they did both. They removed the two-term limits, and then they also changed the age limits because some countries had age limits like 65 or 75, and then somehow the president turns 75 and it's like, you know what? I think we need to allow more flexibility on the age.
Mhm.
And somehow the only person this benefits really is the man who is incumbent. And then obviously there's this sort of lawfare style, uh, stifling opposition, like making sure there's an election, but use sort of techniques and methods to ensure that opposition is somewhat paralyzed in its. And lawfare has different. When I say lawfare, I mean different ranges. At the crux of it, lawfare is basically the incumbent being able to entrench power using legal means or manipulating power or manipulating the legal system. So it varies. It could simply be, okay, we're changing term limits, or the in Rwanda there was a revision of the constitution in about 2017, 2018. They
Mhm.
basically said that Paul Kagame can serve, or the incumbent president can serve one more 7-year term, and then after that we will enforce new term limits. So it will be only 2 terms, but 5 years each. However, the incumbent is still eligible to run for that. So what this basically means is the incumbent could run for another 7-year term, and then after that we start a new one. Then he can still run for a 5-year term, and then the last term. So effectively, Kagame will be president until around 2032 or something like that, 2031 or 2034. Sorry, yeah. So it's there's that level. There's changing the constitution. That was also done in Togo. Togo was much more innovative. The Gnassingbe family has been in power since the 1960s. The son, for Gnassingbe, has been in power since I think about late 2000s. I can double check that. And then in 2024, they changed the constitution. They had an election after changing the constitution. So that was the first election in the new constitution, where they basically said, we are not going to have a powerful president anymore. We're going to have a prime minister, a powerful prime minister, but that prime minister will have no term limits, but will now put term limits on the president, the powerful president. So technically, they have put term limits on the president after they have removed the power from the president to the prime minister, to whom no limits are placed. So Faure Gnassingbe himself just shifted and moved from presidency to prime minister, and you still have the same guy in power, right? So there's very innovative ways of doing this stuff. But then there's the more lower level lawfare that you see, like in Zambia. Lawfare just means maybe like taking someone to court consistently. Like, if we have President Nathan and then have Zenge, who is in opposition. Every time I want to speak, it's like, oh, hold on. I don't know if you have a permit for that per se. Like we see like
also remember this case you didn't pay your Z taxes in 2005. Remember?
Exactly. Yeah. Just basically the idea is to exhaust you. Yeah. The idea is to exhaust you and basically lawyer you to death, because being in opposition costs a lot of money, right? I don't think, and I've said this a lot. We've talked about this
Very
before.
Expensive.
Running a campaign is madly expensive. Imagine like a full-on networking company, a full-on media operation in 3 months. You know what? The Joe Biden gave up on the presidency in like what? How many months? 4 months before the election? 5 months before the election? So the system, the URLs, the codes, everything was all Biden Harris. Right? It was Joe Biden's campaign. Basically, what happened was Joe Biden just basically said, "Okay, Kamala, you take charge of the team that's already there." It was not from scratch; it was already there. They just changed the names from Biden to Harris, because it wasn't like an overnight thing. Because it costs a lot of money. And in America, many of them, they hire firms like PR companies, consultants, tech people. It's not even them that do the work. Whereas in Zambia and Africa, there's less
but
companies that have the
the infrastructure is already there. And
that there's few, even if you set up a consultancy today, and Zambia is having an election in 5 months, and UPND or PF or whichever Tonsi Alliance comes to you and says, can you do a mass nationwide PR campaign for me in 10 provinces, in 110 districts? Are you able to do that? No. You're not able to do. Even the best PR company in Zambia cannot do that we're talking about like in a month. In a month, I should see Nathan's face in a billboard in the most rural corner of Zambia. It's
everywhere.
Incredible work. It costs a lot of money. You are paying people, all of these people. So it needs, and then treasurers. Imagine you worrying about one person squandering your money. Now imagine if each district has a treasurer, right? 110 treasurers. How would you know if your money is being stolen? Right. So if you're in opposition, you have to meet that level for you to even become a competitor to unseat an incumbent. So if you are an incumbency, take them to court. Just like say, as you said, ZRA, was it 1999 or 2001? Yeah, 2001. I think he filed the tax properly. So this go to court. Yeah, just I don't know, just have some fun there. Yeah, we'll just maybe a good 8 hours. We know you're having a campaign somewhere. Just go, just chill by the police station for a bit. you know, yeah.
But
So
I
that's
think I
one.
think
Go
many
ahead.
I think that many Africans are very aware of some of the strategies that like people or these leaders undertake to sort of stay in power. I'm actually very curious with regards to the thinking that's actually like what makes a person do that, you know, because if you're looking at, for example,
Do
people
what?
like um people like for a leader, especially leaders who come in on a wave of like support, you know, like your Mugabe's, your Museveni's, your
Mm,
I mean, he still has support, your Kagame's. So I'm very curious because it's like Paul Kagame could, I mean, he still gets a lot of support now, but he could easily be like a Nelson Mandela level type of person, right? Mugabe could have had the opportunity to be a Nelson Mandela type of a figure, right? Museveni could have had the opportunity to also be, you know, a another level of a leader, you know, like I mean, in terms of like reverence, you know, of these
yeah.
people, but like now you know, one might even argue that their legacy has really well, with you know exception of Paul Kagame, but like the rest, there really has there is always an asterisk now that's going to be to their names. You know, if you
Mm,
mention Paul Biya, I'm pretty sure not many people from Cameroon would speak, you know, positively about him. Um, so it's like what's behind that? That like obviously the easiest answer is like money, but like is that really it? Because you know, especially if you're in a you've just led your I mean could it be also that aspect? I think we had a discussion once about you know how small states um you know just bringing in democracy to like a small state can actually, especially in those times, could actually ruin it. There was need for like an incubation period, and maybe because of the need of that incubation period they then become like power hungry. Is that like what then leads them to being like, oh, now I don't want to go, you know, I'm the
yeah.
only person for
The
this country. Like,
stability. Yeah.
yeah.
The stability excuse. Yeah, the thing is, as you said, many of these leaders came on very popular mandates. They might not even have been elected, but they were immensely popular and people loved them. And they actually
Uh-huh.
did a lot in terms of stability. I mean, Uganda, I've seen those videos of Uganda in the 80s. There was no sugar. There was no sugar
Yeah.
available just on a normal basis at a normal price. There's huge black markets. And Museveni stabilized Uganda to a very large degree. Uganda was not a country to speak of in the 1980s.
Uh-huh.
Even though Obote came on after Idi Amin, after a series of small presidents like Godfrey Binaisa, Lule, Professor Lule, um, Obote's presidency was shrouded in a civil war, because it
Uh-huh.
was felt that the 1980 election was not deemed free and fair. So Museveni's people in the National Resistance Movement, NRM, went to war. Um, and Obote's second era ended in roughly 1985, and then there was a new president, Tito Okello, and then it handed over to Yoweri Museveni, who came on as people say he was a darling of the West and so on, but he was also a darling in Uganda. Many Ugandans at that time I've spoken to testify that at that time Museveni was actually a breath of fresh air, a young leader. He talked about because he had the benefit of hindsight. This was the late 1980s. He had seen people like Mobutu. He had seen, those days Kaunda was protested against a lot, in the 80s. So he had seen what happens. Nyerere had to give up the philosopher king of Africa, Julius Nyerere. It was like, okay, I think I'm not really doing things right. At least Nyerere Kaunda had the audacity to accept that this is it.
Uh-huh.
Kaunda had an election, lost, accepted. Nyerere literally just, he stepped down. He was like, I think let's I'm done here because it seems things are not going well,
Yeah.
right? Um, and he saw the deterioration of how the post-liberation leaders can become, and people expected that this guy really, there's no way this guy can screw up, surely, you know. And Museveni at that time seemed to have been a very pragmatic leader. He was not even talking about ideology, because those days liberation leaders were just like, communism, anti-imperialism, this one,
Uh-huh.
or capitalism, or whatever. He was just like, okay, let's just try and get our economy back on track, fix it, get roads running, get money back in the banks, people's salaries, things like that. Just normal basic stuff back on in control. And he's seen Kagame even more. 1994 genocide, a freaking genocide. The country is not. There's failed state. I don't like the term failed state, but like there was no state. The state collapsed. There was no state to fail in the
Uh-huh.
genocide. And then Kagame comes there, ends the
Uh-huh.
war, not only ends the war, but in a disciplined manner, with a reputable, disciplined type of soldiers. Many books talked about how disciplined Rwandan, the RPF soldiers are there, then now Rwandan army soldiers are. And now, obviously, the rapid economic growth, averaging 7 to 10% economic growth. Yeah. Efficient
Uh-huh.
governance. People talk about how clean Rwanda is. Um, and So people have reason to like these leaders, to support them. But then it comes a point where, how long are you going to be there? And what happens when you leave? Because that's a very scary
That's the big
question, even for
question.
the supporters. Yeah, even
That
for
is
the
a very
supporters,
scary
because
question.
you might love Kagame, but what happens when Kagame leaves? Will Kagame's good stuff continue? And we want to
Yeah.
see it managed in a proper way. It shouldn't be a shock, It shouldn't be a shock
Uh-huh.
to the system. Like, oh crap, God, Kagame is
Right.
gone. What are we going to do now? You know what I mean? And
Uh-huh.
that will leave room for things that probably most Rwandans wouldn't want. So whether you are for or
Yeah.
against, I think many people can agree that these people brought a lot of stability, a lot of economic development. The democracy part, that's another question, right? Um, but the truth is, if you have done, yeah, no, the truth is, if you have
Uh,
done such a good job and you have indeed stabilized your country, if you have achieved that, yes, if you have achieved that, then we should be able to see that your legacy can stand beyond that, because so far as I know, it's not a president of life thing.
uh,
Presidents for life have existed in African history. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And I wanted to talk about that next. Like, Hastings Kamuzubanda, president of Malawi. He was president of Malawi from 1964, I think, to 1993. He was
Uh-huh.
declared president of life in 1971. So there, there's no
Wow.
joke. It's like, yeah, I'm here for life. There's no election. Don't
Yeah.
don't even don't even So it's not a thing. Bro just was like, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
president of life, president for life. What can you do about it? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that like it feels to me that it's similar to, like, for me, I'm speaking from my perspective, right? It feels like I don't
All
think
right.
I would want to do that. I think I would definitely take the Mandela perspective and step down after some time, because it feels to me like it's that thing that it's sort of related to a thing that Franz Fanon had talked about with regards to just being locked in this, like, where the colonizer and the oppressor on the oppressed are sort of locked in this like prison, because the oppressor has to do the things that an oppressor does, and of course the oppressed has to feel those things, right? And so it feels like, in the same way, like being a dictator or an old person like holding on to power is this, like, you're locked into this position because you have to use these means such as the military, or other means to sort of maintain your power. You have to sleep with one eye open. I think there was a documentary I read about with I think about Idi Amin, and some, I think it was a documentary on DSTV or something about Idi Amin and Stalin and like some of these like crazy dictators, and that they had struggle. There was reports that they had struggle sleeping at night. You know, those sorts of things. So it's like I really and
Yeah.
also even getting to that comment of even just like what happens afterwards is such a scary question.
Mm.
Uh, there are certain countries that quote unquote, I don't know if you can even say they got lucky, but at least the transition from Mugabe to, Mnangagwa wasn't as violent as,
Yeah.
it could have been. I think people I think people tend to underestimate how things can spiral. I mean, looking at Sudan is a perfect example. Here you have an uprising that starts out
Mm.
like really, wonderfully, and it's this amazing thing of people coming together. But then because there's this power
Yeah.
vacuum, two people are now fighting, and that's what's like literally what's happening in Sudan. It's two people fighting, and
Basically.
it's like you look at countries like Cameroon, you look at countries like Uganda, it's like, and I think I was telling this to one of my friends where I was like, it was very interesting that during the Ugandan election, most of the reports I was seeing, they kind of didn't really talk a lot about, the election itself, but everyone was kind of like, yeah, Museveni is going to win, but what's going to happen after him? Like what's coming after
Yeah.
Museveni?
Yeah.
So like I think people are kind of, a lot of media houses are kind of just like,
They know
and
they know a bit about the exit strategy, the end plan. Yeah, and I think, look,
yeah,
I think that
yeah,
it's good you've mentioned that, because
precisely.
whether it's a benevolent, loved, or accomplished dictator like Kagame, or whether it's a leader that, okay, some would argue he's accomplished, but also quite brutal, Muammar Gaddafi. Um, the end,
Mm,
the after, you mentioned Omar al-Bashir, the after that, you can remove a dictator, but what happens after? Dictator is just one guy.
yeah.
He's been running a system. You do not run, you're
Mm,
not president for a country for 30 years, 40 years, and you think one human being is the problem. Only one. Like, that's crazy. Like, there's a
yeah.
full-on state police apparatus in most of these countries. Sometimes there's rival groups, not sometimes, most of the time, because normally it's a method of coup-proofing to decentralize the monopoly of violence. The part of
Mhm,
the main authority that a state gets is that they have the legal means and legal monopoly over violence. They are the only people in the country that have legal right to means of force and potentially
mhm,
violence. Now, when you have different centers of that, then you can play against each other. Maybe some are connected to your tribe, the Presidential Guard, or the
mhm,
they talked about the Janjaweed, which is now RSF in Sudan,
mhm,
fighting the proper army. So there you go. Now that's a result of what happens when a dictatorship collapses and you think one person is the problem. And there was attempts by civilians to create a proper sensible government, but that was usurped by those two. Although the army was not what
mhm,
creation of Omar Bashir, it was the RSF.
mhm,
But that's what happens. And in Zimbabwe, Mnangagwa's faction, Grace Mugabe's faction, these are all fighting within, it's a palace coup, really. They don't call it a coup, but it was a palace fight in 2017, November 2017, when Mugabe was forced to resign, if I could say it like that. So, yeah, so many of these things, most of the results after this leader goes don't look very good because people don't really think about them. They don't really
mhm,
think about an act towards a pragmatic exit strategy. Gaddafi is the worst example because external interests also
yeah.
coupled with normal, genuine Libyans who genuinely were protesting against Gaddafi. Normal Libyans,
Right.
because that was not the first time they protested before during the Arab Spring. And I think many people who, especially Pan Africanists who didn't live in Libya, will try to romanticize everything that Gaddafi did, try to paint it like there was no protest,
Right.
everyone was happy, nothing happened. And then external forces came, but they just manipulated and took their own interests out of it. But they were genuine people that were protesting on the ground that genuinely wanted change, right? And this is
Right.
always, it's always the capture of the revolution. It's always a general who is already within the establishment. You know, it's it's external forces and so on and so forth. So ultimately, the people's wishes rarely is the end result. So
Right.
being able to think about how this stuff is supposed to transition to a next dispensation, a new dispensation, is very difficult. It's easy to overthrow. Let me not say it's not
Mhm.
easy, but that's the easy part compared to the rest.
No,
You
but
know,
the rest is, yeah. I was going to say,
yeah, you
like, I
don't.
really love that you brought up what's his name, Libya, because I when you said Libya, I immediately got that image of his last days in power where he gave this like rambling speech at I think it was the
He
country's
said,
like statue. Is it
it kind of sounds like Zenga Zenga.
yeah, yeah, but you see this like the way the camera pans down from this like image of like the arm crushing the American fighter jet and then onto
Missile, yeah, candidate, yeah.
sorry, missile, yeah, sorry, onto Gaddafi's face as he's rambling in this like bombed building. It's something out of a movie, to be honest, but I think it's
Yeah,
really the epitome of what you're trying to describe, really, of that transition is really the question that
yeah.
really needs to be asked.
And
Yeah, 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 and it
these
can.
transitions are these transitions are not pretty. Like there's so many examples of transitions going wrong. And
Mhm,
Zimbabwe is the best case scenario, right?
mhm.
Uh, but normally transitions don't really end very, very well. Um, normally it's within the same party anyway, or a faction of the same
Can
party. Uh,
can I ask you a question?
so yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, but like, are there certain elements that um make a country more susceptible to these things than others?
So you can have long time old presidents in different fashions. But in most cases, they had been in the military. Pobia hasn't been in the military per se. I can fact check that again. But
Mhm.
in most cases, they are military. They have some military attachment, and they have built an establishment that's intertwined with the economy. And so, military and defense ministries have enormous stakes in the country. Like Rwanda, defense forces have a lot of stakes in the country's economy, like Crystal Ventures, um, which is why sanctions targeting Rwanda's defense personnel from the US is also inadequately also targeting elements of the defense economy. Um, in So countries where this happens, is there anything that predisposes countries to this? I I don't think there's a solid thing. You know, I don't think there's a solid thing because many countries have gone through long-term leadership. It's just the style um, and the temperament of the individual. When you have civilian leaders,
Mhm.
like a long time before the 1990s, many countries had these. The better off countries in terms of peace and stability had long-term leaders. So staying in power for a long time was not unusual. You know, it's just that right now we don't expect it, right? We expect multi-party democracy, elections every 5 years, and the president to leave after 10 or 8 years, right? But those days in the 80s and the 70s, it wasn't unusual. You had so many leaders. Even if we look at SADC countries that are generally more stable, more peaceful, you had a lot of dominant parties, some just outright one-party states, and long-term leaders. even the most democratic countries. Botswana had Seretse Khama. So Seretse Khama, who was in power for about 15 years until he died, right? He just election after election. Now, in Botswana, there's 2 term limits to the presidency. Mozambique was a one-party state. Zambia was a one-party state. Malawi, as I said, had a president for life. Tanzania was a one-party state. Nyerere was in power. I remember when I was a kid, when you learn basics of African post-independence history, you always say there's always a big man or a strong man somewhere there. Like, oh, Tanzania is to Nyerere, Kenya is to Kenyatta, Zambia is to Kaunda, you know, and all of those things. And so now leaders who have done it later on rarely are given that same acceptance. So it's I'm trying to say basically that it's out of fashion. It's not the fashion right now. People, the democratic, multi-party democratic wave came in the 1990s. It's just not tolerable the same way that it used to be.
So
every country is prone to long-term
if I were to
leadership.
ask you a question, right?
They come in different shapes and sizes.
Do you think that a country, say like Zambia, right, where we have been blessed in a sense that we haven't had to deal with that, especially for us, right? Our parents maybe because they had to, deal with Kaunda, but like for us, for example, we've never really had to see any of that. Do you think that there's no possibility? There's no possibility of that type of style of leadership coming back?
No, look. Well, I think it's unlikely. You can never say impossible, but I think it's very unlikely. But it takes a level of hollowing out of the civic space and freedoms of speech, and actual challenges. Whatever happens in Zambia, whatever law the president wants to push in, I can bet you that there will be a civil society that will take it to court. I can bet you there will be an opposition that will spread the news, and people will talk about it, right? When Kaunda was pushing a one-party state, there were dozens of other countries in the world pushing one-party states, and it was Zambia. Zambia was not that significant, so and there was no internet, there was no social media. So it was very easy to push in a one-party state and you do nothing about it. Maybe the political elite will complain, but today it's just extremely difficult. It require a level of hollowing out of the civic space and some kind of brainwashing to be successful. But no one is trying to have one-party states. What they're trying to do is what leaders try to do now to stay in power for a long time is it's not presidents of lives, it's not one-party states, but the outcomes are the same. Is changing term limits and changing constitutions because you need legitimacy. And these days you cannot go past really a democratic election to cement that. An election, sorry, to cement that legitimacy. Even if it's winning 10 elections. Yeah.
Okay.
By 99%.
For the countries that have leaders that are for countries who seem to be having presidents for life, like, do you think that we can see what would be the ideal situation? Do you think that many of these countries, say a Uganda, say a Cameroon or something, that there would be some sort of positive transformation like we see in Nepal, for example, where literally the country is transitioning into what the people want through Discord. Do you think that something of that, do you think that these countries kind of have because I do think that, me personally, I do think that Rwanda probably would have some fail-safes in place to have a sensible transition, but the rest, I don't know.
Yeah. So I think in reality, there are people who pose questions about whether or not Paul Biya is even in charge in Cameroon. There's other people below him, and we heard that about Mugabe also. So I don't know too much about Cameroonian politics, but it would be interesting to see what would happen. I would not be surprised if family members and old guard members are positioning themselves, which is why they insist on old presidents staying there. Because if you are within the palace, when I say palace, I mean the regime in the inner circle, it's to your benefit to keep the president in power for as long as possible and have the president die while in power so that you control the transition rather than have an election that is uh, that results in the defeat of the president and the president dies in exile. For example, Dos Santos, Eduardo Dos Santos, was president of Angola for over 30 years, from the 1970s up to 2017 or so. Once he decided to transition and um, give power within, although this is not an election, it's more or less just internal transition, give power to João Lourenço. Um, Lourenço ended up coming to power and uh, went on an anti-corruption zeal to which affected the Dos Santos' family and Dos Santos' net worth. Eduardo Dos Santos and his family had to leave to Portugal and Spain and other countries. Isabella Dos Santos' daughter, who also at one point happened to be Africa's richest woman, due to her ownership of Sonangol, the main oil conglomerate, and Dos Santos' son, who was in charge of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Angola, all left. So this was not a good calculation for themselves. So it's from the perspective of the palace, of the inner circle of the regime, it sounds better to keep President Nathan for life in power. Let him get gray hair if necessary. President Nathan can be drooling. I don't care if necessary. President Nathan we'll carry him to parliament. Like if necessary, we'll pump him up with all sorts of pills until you die. Keep him there so that once he's dead, those who are around the president can testify and say, no, actually, this is the rightful heir. That is the rightful heir. And this is how we're going to do this on our terms. So that tends to be one of the reasons why some countries would refuse to let a president leave. It's mostly, I don't know if the presidents themselves would want to want to stay in power. It's also about the people around them, because people around them are younger and they want to enjoy their money in their country. Because after that,
Yeah.
it's very few cases where, if it's not managed in their favor, very few cases where many of the top elite remain in that country. They either leave, some of them maybe manage to wiggle their way through the new regime. So it's a thing. But I think another thing that I'm also interested in is the fact that there are so many young people in Africa and there's so many old presidents. Do you think it's something to do with wisdom? And this chief. Do you think there's something to do with that? Like, Mobutu Sese Seko was being asked about leading the DRC with a firm hand, and there's an interview where he's actually quite young those days. This is like at his prime when he's consolidated his power of Congo, and he's like, oh no, and you're speaking in French. It's like, oh no, yeah, in Africa we are used to chiefs. Chiefs is how we run things. So when the chief speaks, it's final. There's a different interpretation, because in many African pre-colonial villages, there was actually a consultative body. People would actually have an opportunity to have differences and speak to the chief, and the chief would have for lozis in Western Zambia, they call them indunas. You have counselors who would take in what people are saying and consider it based on the interests of the chief and the interests of the people, and then the chief will make a decision. It's supposedly a well-trained, benevolent chief who take account of everyone's opinions. But Mobutu's interpretation is that the chief is an absolute type of dictator. So, do you think that the idea of presidency and electoral democracy, changing terms and so on and so forth, is that like a thing Africans are just not into?
I would disagree. I mean, I would disagree in the sense that like there are lots of things that I think that Africans have had to basically adopt and adjust to that weren't a part of their um their political quote unquote system in the past. I would say that um there are countries that have shown that this is possible, that democracy is possible. And to say Africa again, Africa is vast and huge, so um there are countries that have shown that, this is very, very possible. You don't need to make a big deal out of it. I do think that like presidency does I think that presidency, of course, like the question is what age do you think like the presidency should be at, around like somewhere there? Like I think that there's of course you want somebody that has some level of experience, so that definitely does push up the age quite a bit. I think also when it comes to especially when you're looking at economic issues, sometimes it's not so much like what you know, but actually like who who you know as well. So you'd probably want somebody who's been in this type of industry for some time, knows who to talk to, how to talk to people, and those sorts of things. So that does definitely come with certain things. But I think you wanted to say something before I go on. You're muted.
No, I was just gonna joke because you're like someone with experience, and then there's a president who has been president for 20 years, and it's like, well, I mean,
Yeah, that's the extreme, right? I mean, that's what Museveni said. He said, if I'm here, why don't you want to use me? I'm available. Why don't you want to use me, right?
yeah, no, but
Um,
but just
I just,
like as a parting shot, I think it's young leaders. I'm not necessarily saying we have to have young leaders, but we have to have leaders who are in touch with the population. And being young
1,000%.
might
Yeah.
help, or having a
Mhm.
young cabinet might help. But having someone at the top who is, these
Mhm.
are supposedly executive presidents of power. They're not kings with ceremonial power. These are people who,
Mhm.
when the president speaks, they talk about everything the president does. You see how the coverage of Donald Trump. If Donald Trump sneezes on live TV, people are going to be like, "Oh, what's going on? What's happening?" 3 articles,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's important to have a president that's fit, right? We talk about Mandela a lot.
Yeah.
Mandela was pretty old when he was president. He was 70 something,
Yeah.
but luckily he was
Sure.
only there for one term. And many of the people that were making the decisions, like legislation and stuff, were like Thabo Mbeki, who were a bit young, who was a bit younger at that time.
Mhm.
So I think a president that's fit, and a president, as you said, that has the no,
Can I ask you a
that
question?
has the,
Do you is there
yeah.
a country that you think is like globally? Is there a country that you think is like a model of what Africans are
Mm,
trying to achieve?
that's a hard one. Very, very hard one because there's always downsides to everything, even the best models.
Yeah.
I have my models.
What's your model?
Uh,
Oh,
I would
Singapore.
say, yeah, I'd say Singapore.
Yeah.
Um, Kenya has this
Iron
thing called
Fist much?
Kenya. Kenya has this thing called Kenya has this thing called the road to Singapore. Basically,
Oh
William
wow.
Ruto said in his lifetime he wants to see Kenya become a first world country. Apparently, that's what he wants to do. I mean, it can happen. Why not?
Yeah.
But
All
yeah, me,
right, man.
my model looks kind of like Singapore. Look, I'm from Zambia, right? I'm not from a big dog African country, right? So I'm just
Yeah,
giving you
what's your
context
tone, man?
why. Huh? What?
Yeah. I said, what's your tone, man?
No, 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 no. Look, for me, I
No, I know what you
actually,
mean. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I know
yeah,
what
yeah,
you mean.
I don't need Zambia. Doesn't need to be Egypt, or South Africa. Like, I don't want to be
Uh-huh.
there. Um, I see countries like Switzerland, Singapore, Austria,
Really?
even. Yeah,
Yeah.
those are my
Yeah. Okay.
those
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
more,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, those are countries that I just
But
really
I
want,
mean,
like
the
listen.
fun.
I want
Yeah.
my ideal state is where like I don't think everyone will be rich, like it will never happen, but like the base understanding of poor is much higher, than it actually
But
is. That's
then,
one. And then
but
churning
then,
out a good number of millionaires, possibly a few billionaires, but just a high quality standard of living. You know what I mean? Like I don't really mean like we should have like a,
uh,
like this greatness theory of something, but just like, oh, there's
yeah.
economic shock. Oh, that's nice. You just watch and you're like, oh, okay.
Hmm.
You know,
Excuse me.
just high quality
Yeah.
citizenry and quality of life. That's really what I want. The average Zambian should
Yeah. I mean,
be like middle class or upper
it's
middle class type of
interesting.
individual. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean it's. I think that's a solid answer. I think like a Switzerland type of a model. I think actually works, but of course, there's always that question mark on Swiss banking and what the Swiss do in order to make that money. But I
Every
think it's
country
still
a
I
few
think
nasty things.
so. Are you comfortable with Zambia doing a few nasty things?
No,
Because I
look,
mean, Zambia doesn't
look.
do
eh,
anything. Is a good boy. He
uh,
doesn't do anything.
and we have 60% poverty. All right, so
Yeah. So are you trying to say that okay, it's time to take off the gloves, man? Are you trying to say that
no,
Zambia should
no,
now
no,
start?
no, no, no. Look, I'm not saying that.
Are
That's
you
fine.
trying to
Navigate.
say that Zambia should have involved itself in the Congo situation and sent
No, I'm not
troops
saying that. I'm not
to
saying that.
secure
I
to secure itself?
I definitely I'm not saying
Yeah.
that. What Yeah, what I'm saying is like,
Or are you trying to say that the Federation should come back? We should invade Zimbabwe and
I don't even know what you're talking
Malawi.
about.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so it wouldn't be a bad
Yeah.
idea. I think we get along very well with Zimbabweans. Um,
Yeah.
but I think like
Yeah. Yeah.
I think when you look at it, Singapore is like Singapore and Switzerland are both accused of sheltering money from dubious sources. That's what happens when you're a
Mm-hmm.
financial center. When you're a financial center, ultimately, and how much can you
Well.
control? I don't know. That's a whole case study. You're like a finance guy, so you probably know this more. How much can you actually control of the money that comes to you? Like,
Mm,
um, so yeah, I don't know. If Zambia has that strategy, then yeah, we might have to watch out for things like that where dirty money comes from. But I can guarantee you, there's no way you're going to stop 100% the use of that money being used for things that might be against Zambian values. I'm sure Swiss
mm-hmm,
values do not condone plundering of the DRC, but they accept the money, right? You know what
mm,
I mean? So I'm just being
yeah.
realistic here.
It's
I'm not, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I definitely understand where you're coming from. As you said in the beginning, it's difficult to see a model that can actually work. Unfortunately, the as you said, the a country where you have a sizable middle class, very, very, very. I mean, if possible, zero poverty. Um, and that
But that
type of
has
a thing.
happened.
For me,
Singapore, that happened. Singapore,
yeah,
Malaysia, Indonesia, Malaysia,
Captain Singapore. There he goes again.
Malaysia, it's a good example because they were with war.
Yeah, I know,
Singapore
I
became
know, I know, I know.
independent in 1965. Never in
No, it's just that.
1964.
No, it's just that. Like you've been talking about Singapore. I can't remember if you read a book or something.
I
But
did. I read a book.
ever since you read that book, you've just been
I recommend.
even at a dinner party or something. By the way, Singapore was.
I think
Yeah,
we
sorry.
can
No,
we,
go ahead,
we can
man.
put that book up, the book that I read, because
Uh
it's
huh.
it's so easy to read. It makes development sound like common sense. That's
Mhm.
that's what really shook me because it was like, then what are we doing in these countries in Africa when we were richer than? And it's true, we were richer than countries like Singapore. Um, you know the and the countries, even Malaysia, not talking about Malaysia that much, but Malaysia has managed to reduce poverty in the last 30 years from about 30 something, 40
Mhm.
something percent to, I think in some indices around 5% or less, you know?
Do,
So,
do you
yeah.
think that it's? I think you told me one situation. I think it was one time you told me something about the history of Malaysia, right? And this is where my question is coming from, because I'm a strong believer in the fact that I think Zambia needs like a baby from capitalism and socialism, if that makes any sense, whereby you have a government that sort of has these capitalistic ideals, but you have a population that's socialist, if that makes any sense. But my question
Okay.
is, like, do you see, because do you see in Singapore and in Malaysia, do you see countries, or at least when they were developing, do you see a group of people that see urgency in terms of dealing with inequality? Because inequality is unsustainable. I mean, even in the United States, you're starting to see the cracks with regards to, this increase in inequality.
Do I think inequality
And
is
in South Africa is
unsustainable?
also another big one. No, 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 no. My question was, do you think that like part of the reason why those governments, Singapore and Malaysia, were very strict, very disciplined with what they were doing was because they know what like unsustainable, like massive levels of inequality does to a country, if that makes any sense. That like it can essentially destabilize. I think you're telling me about how in Malaysia, I think the
Yeah.
government that really changed things noticed that inequality was like every time the new government would come in, inequality would increase, and then the people would just uprise and take off.
Yeah,
So it's
it
like
was, yeah, there wasn't a new government, but it was in the 1960s. Um, I think the leader at that time, was it
uh-huh,
Razak or someone else? Name starts with an O.
uh-huh,
One of the first early leaders of Malaysia. Um, basically they noticed from that era that even in Singapore, West so in Singapore, there were race riots, riots over because they were a multicultural country, um, and basically when there's
uh-huh,
inequality and fighting for identity in these young countries, you result in war. You just have a war, and it can happen. Um, so that was like they had a taste
uh-huh,
of what the instability looked like. There was no war, but there were race riots, and Singapore
uh-huh,
made great efforts to tackle that, both with economic prowess and also even things like the Singapore urban housing development. It's a famous example because in most countries people have homeowners, but in Singapore the home ownership is stewarded by the state. The state built tens and thousands of high-rise houses, and many people just live there. They bought the houses eventually through these pension schemes that they created, and many of the houses are have quotas for each race. So in Singapore they have majority Chinese, then they have Malays, they have Indians. So each residential block has to have a certain quota of people of that race. So if you think of it in Zambia, if you have a building like that, you insist that in this housing gated community, you're only allowed to have 25% Bemba, and then
uh-huh,
25% Tonga, and then another 15% Lozi, another, so on and so forth. So that at no one time is this housing residential complex a clique of one ethnic group, right? Because
uh-huh,
you have experienced what it looks like to have race riots, and it's much harder to have race riots when you guys live in the same place. When I have to see you every single
oh, that's
morning,
smart.
you know. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah. So
that's
whereas in
very
many
smart.
countries you have many cities, you have little China, you have a little India, you have this place is where the Somalis stay, this place is where these people stay. So yeah, I think that's another part. You have to actually get your demographics to get with each other and see themselves, um, abolish not necessarily abolish, but suppress
Mhm.
that identity that divides you people and promote the identity of the country first. You know, yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just asking that question because many of the countries that are on the highest, like that have the highest level of inequality are actually some most of them are actually from Southern Africa. um so that's why I was asking
Any of the countries that have the highest what?
that question as well. Inequality.
Ah, yeah, true. That's true.
uh, South Africa's up there, League of its own, of course. Zambia is up there as well.
Namibia.
So
Mhm.
yeah. But yeah. But yeah, man, that was a pretty good conversation. I learned quite a lot. And yeah, thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you for chilling with us during this fireside chat. See you guys on the next episode.
I am an African.